Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, September 5th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to continue with our Week 2 breakdowns. We'll get into Colorado at Nebraska first, an incredible game over there in Lincoln, and then we'll get to Tennessee at North Carolina State, although they are playing in Charlotte, so not necessarily at North Carolina State. But we'll break down both of those two huge games in the late-night slate on Saturday. Then we'll continue with the Week 2 predictions. We'll do three more games for you today. South Carolina, Kentucky, California at Auburn, or Cal at Auburn. Feels weird to call them California. And then Kansas at Illinois is the other one that I want to talk about. A number of really big time games in that kind of middle of the day towards the night that I want to break down for you guys. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams. Where are they this week, and what do we need to see from them this week after a couple of not great performances in Week 1? And then we get to Thursday hot takes. I'll do a couple of hot takes about this upcoming weekend. Who's going to start a Heisman campaign? Who's going to struggle this weekend when they really shouldn't? A lot of different things that I want to break down for you guys. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of your chat. You can see that little $sign. If you click on that, add any question or comment you'd like, add your name, it will pop up on the screen and we'll be able to have a fun back and forth here. Sometimes the chat goes a little bit fast for me to keep up with, so that's definitely a great way to go about it, but either way you want to do that, you can also use the GSMCpodcast.net page, still up and working and does the exact same thing. So either of those will work fine, and we'll make this a little bit more interactive, which is always what I want. But let's jump into Colorado heading over to Lincoln, Nebraska to play a huge rivalry game this next weekend. And I think this might be one of those games that Texas-Michigan is the big game of the weekend. I think everyone understands that. This one is not taking that much of a backseat. This is a crazy game and so much going into it on both sides of the ball. So it's going to be absolutely awesome in Lincoln, Nebraska this upcoming weekend. And we get this game at night. It's going to be awesome to watch this one under the lights with that crowd, with that energy at 7:30 p.m. on Saturday. And it's an awesome game. Nebraska's only favored by a little bit over a touchdown, roughly where I expected them to be. And I think the quarterback matchup is the one that turns all the heads, right? Shedeur Sanders, one of the best quarterbacks and players in the country, and then Dylan Raiola, one of the young guns, a guy that could very well be in that group come next year or even later on this year. A very talented player and one that pretty much everyone is watching, all the way from us college football fans all the way up to NFL scouts right about now. So this game is really hard not to love. These two teams go back such a far way. I'd like to see them play every single year, but we haven't been quite as lucky in that over recent times. But on one side of the ball, you have Colorado with all of this hype, with all of this energy, and whenever Colorado walks into a building, there's going to be energy, no doubt about that. And then on the other side, Nebraska finally has their hope, right? They finally feel like they might be heading back up to the promised land, and it's because of number 15. It's because of Dylan Raiola, so this is a lot of energy going into one. Obviously, Nebraska coming off a dominant performance against UTEP. Colorado got a big-time win over North Dakota State and got a little bit of extra rest, which obviously helps a little bit. So I think the biggest thing here is we're going to see a very different style of game from both these teams, particularly on offense, and it's going to be really interesting to see which one comes out on top. But let's get into the players to watch, and the first one I want to start with is Jalen Lloyd. I think when we talk about Colorado, it's all explosive plays, it's all down the field, it's all Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. and LeJontay Wester running free in the back end. Jalen Lloyd can do that as well, and I think that's something that Nebraska is likely going to need in this game. Is just at some point in this game, you likely want to run the clock and likely want to use the run game a ton in this game, but at one point, you'd love to break one, and at one point, you'd love to attack this back end that has been known to be a little bit vulnerable to that deep ball. So this is a guy that I think could change the game just on a dime. And then MJ Sherman is a guy that has transferred over from Georgia a couple of years ago now and has only become a better player, is more confident in this offense this year, or in his defense this year, than he ever has been before, and is a very talented player coming off the edge. So maybe he's the guy that keeps Shedeur Sanders at bay just a little bit and is able to get him on the ground a couple of times, because last year they were able to get him on the ground 8 times in this game. LeJontay Wester is the other guy I want to talk about. He wasn't quite as heard from in the first game, but this is a very special player. And I think when you're playing a back end like Nebraska's that's so talented, that has so much ability, getting the ball in the hands of guys that are just really special with the ball in their hands and have so much speed is going to be able to help you kind of negate that a little bit. And then Preston Hodge, a very talented nickelback that they brought over in the transfer portal, and he's a very talented kid. He's someone that's going to get a lot of different matchups on Saturday and with a lot of different big body receivers, and he's going to have to handle that. He's a big-time player, but if he makes that one play against Dylan Raiola, maybe forces that one big mistake, this one gets really interesting in a hurry. But let's get to what Colorado needs to do to win this game, and I think the quick pass game is the one that I really think is going to be huge for them. When you talk about this back end for Nebraska, Tommy Hill is a first-round talent type of player. Malcolm Herzog is a very talented guy. Isaac Gifford and Moore are really talented players, really high-level guys, and Colorado has the guys to absolutely match that. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's Shedeur Sanders or all of the ridiculous wide receivers they have, it's going to be one of the great matchups in this game, and I definitely will talk about that a little bit later. But at the end of the day, Travis Hunter, LeJontay Wester, they are very special with the ball in their hands. They are very special because they're so shifty, they're so fast, and I think when you have guys like Tommy Hill and Isaac Gifford on that other side, you want to make sure those guys have the ball in their hands as quickly as possible. They're very good coverage guys on that back end. So anytime you can get the ball in the hands of Travis Hunter, you're doing something right, obviously. But I think especially getting it to him early, slants, curls, screens, just to start the game before you can open up that big play downfield. And then get mistakes from the kid. Get mistakes from Dylan Raiola. This is an absolute must for this team. This defense is not necessarily at the place that you would love it to be. I think it's taken big-time strides from a year ago, no doubt about it, but there were a couple of big-time blown coverages on Saturday, and they very much need to fix that. So if, Dylan Raiola doesn't have to do anything incredible in this game, and Nebraska is able to do 8-minute touchdown drives compared to 2 or 3 for Colorado, I think they'd feel really good about that, if I'm being totally honest. I think Nebraska would love that, and they would say, our defense is going to get a stop at some point, and then we'll be able to run this game out. So I don't know who it's going to be on that back end. Maybe it's Preston Hodge making that big play. Maybe it's Travis Hunter. Maybe it's Shiloh Sanders. But someone needs to take advantage of this young kid and possibly get a pick, because that's likely what Colorado is going to need to win this game. And then no unforced errors. This is a big-time thing in week one where you saw a couple of things from Colorado that were just pointless. They didn't do anything for the game and only put them in a position to really make that game a little bit closer than it probably should have been. And the biggest one that has been talked about is the late game clock management. It was downright egregious. There's no other way to put it. Throwing the ball on 1st and 10 with a minute 30 left doesn't make any sense. There's no other way to talk about it. But no one really knows how that play was called. I don't really want to get into the details of that. Some are saying it was Shedeur. Regardless of who it is, that just cannot happen. And then I think there were not really too many penalties from Colorado. They were pretty clean on that part, but there were a couple from Shiloh Sanders that were just unnecessary. A couple of late hits, a couple of things that were just kind of boneheaded mistakes that don't need to happen. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just don't hand Nebraska anything. They're a very good team that will take whatever you give them. Do not hand them anything without them forcing it at the very least. And then on the Nebraska side, lean on the run game. We know what the big-time advantage is in this game, and it's usually Nebraska in the trenches against Colorado. Now, Colorado is much better on that defensive line this year compared to last, but Nebraska is better on the offensive line as well. So we'll see what happens in that battle. It was a very fun one a year ago, but keep that offense on the sideline. If Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter are standing on the sideline, well, Travis Hunter will never be standing on the sideline, but as long as they are not on offense, you're likely winning this game. That is the biggest thing here, is they are so dangerous on the offensive side of the ball that if you can run the clock and have 6, 7, 8-minute touchdown drives, it's going to be nearly impossible for Colorado to pull this off. It's just going to be impossible for that defense to keep up the way that they need to, and for that offense to make every single play the way that they need to. And then the other part of this is keep Shedeur Sanders in the pocket. He is such a dangerous player when he gets outside of that pocket, and he can dice you up every which way from Tuesday regardless. I can promise you that. So whether he's in the pocket or outside of it, he can do dangerous stuff. There's no doubt about that. But it does make the window smaller. It does make these really incredible wide receivers for Colorado, it makes it harder for them to get that big play potential downfield. So keeping him in the pocket, making sure there's not that play where he's standing pretty much alone for a couple of seconds and then throwing a dart to Travis Hunter 30 yards down the field. So it's a lot of just keeping this guy at bay. You're never going to outright beat Shedeur Sanders. He is too good. He's too talented. He throws the ball with too much anticipation and really just ridiculous talent on the ball. But at the end of the day, you can negate some of his ability. You can keep him in the pocket, you can force him to throw into tight windows, and then maybe you get a mistake or two. And that's really all you need if you're Nebraska. And then finally, use the crowd. This is as excited a Nebraska crowd as you will find in a very, very long time, and they do not struggle to be excited. I can promise you that. So you have a rivalry game. You have a quarterback that they feel incredibly, incredibly good about. You have everything going in one direction. You got to start this game fast. You got to come out of the gate swinging and say, Jalen Raiola, you are a young quarterback. I fully understand that. And you do want to ease him into this game. You don't want him throwing downfield right away. But you also don't want to put the training wheels on. You also don't want to take your foot off the gas because this is such a talented player and such a rhythm thrower that you don't want to take him out of that rhythm. So what I would do if I was Nebraska is take that ball, run the ball down the field, and just bury them. Try to go for a 6, 7, 8-minute drive, score a touchdown, and then Colorado standing on the sideline thinking, we haven't run an offensive play, and we're about halfway through the first quarter, and then you're in control, and then you're in a place where you can really get going, and that crowd is fully behind you, and you could do it on defense as well. If you wanted to get to Shedeur a couple of times, maybe blitz a little bit more aggressively early on, that would be another way to go about it. But overall, start fast. Come out of the gate swinging and show your crowd that you are coming into this game with the same intensity that they feel going into this game. And then finally, some matchups to watch on this in this game. Tommy Hill against whoever he is matched up with, but particularly Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. Those guys are so talented, and keeping those guys at bay is not an easy thing to do, but Tommy Hill is a first-round talent at cornerback, so maybe he can make that one big play that you very much need. And then the Nebraska O-line against the Colorado D-line is absolutely huge. I think when you look at what Nebraska is going to want to do, it's run the ball. There's no two ways about that, and Colorado has gotten a lot better on that defensive line, but whoever wins this battle is likely going to win the game, and you would like to think that Nebraska's O-line would have the big-time advantage, but Colorado can make some things happen, then maybe this gets a little bit closer than we're thinking. And then finally, Shedeur Sanders versus Tony White, the defensive coordinator for Nebraska, because this guy's really hard to trick. He's really hard to get into mistakes and get into precarious situations, but if you can bait him just once or twice, if you can get him to throw into tight windows just once or twice and get a pick or get a fumble, whatever it looks like, you might just win this game. So I think that's the biggest thing is Shedeur Sanders is so hard to beat if you're just 11 players on the field. It takes a really, really good play caller on the other side, and Tony White has every ability to do that, but needs to take a big-time step forward, and that defense needs to play just lights out on Saturday. But overall, I think you look at this game, and there's so many different ways you could go. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting, hard-fought game, but I do think Nebraska gets it done. I think it's a little bit closer than some people might be expecting, but I think Colorado makes a couple of plays down the stretch of this game to make it a little bit closer. I think Nebraska's run game is just too much for this Colorado team to handle, at least for 4 quarters. I think they might be able to hang around through half and maybe through the third quarter, but I think slowly that Colorado D-line and defense in general will be worn down, and Nebraska will be able to get a big-time win in week 2 and then just launch their season off. So it'll be a really fun game over there in Lincoln. I do have Nebraska taking the win, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about Tennessee at NC State, another incredible game in that night slate. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with the breakdown of that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Colorado heading over to Lincoln to play a huge game this Saturday. I do have Nebraska getting that one by 6 points, but I think it could be a really, really fun up and down game, just very different styles on both sides of the ball on offense. But let's jump into Tennessee versus NC State, because this is a very, very fun one over in Charlotte this weekend. Obviously, would love to see it in Raleigh. I don't know why it's in Charlotte, but at the end of the day, still going to be a very fun game, and I think it's one that a lot of people are looking at and saying it's going to be Tennessee. There's no two ways about it. What they did last week compared to what NC State did last week were two very different football teams. I'll just put it that way. But at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be incredible fun. And I think NC State's going to play much better football than they did in week one. And I think Tennessee might just take a small step back, although I think they might just be off to the races over there in Knoxville. But this is a really interesting game. This is about, Tennessee showing that they're real, showing that they're going to show up every single Saturday, and that they are part of a group that possibly can make the playoff. On the NC State side, it's kind of just washing that week one game away. They did win, but was very, very ugly in the process. So being able to get over that, and especially get a big time win over Tennessee, it would launch this season. It would get everything going for NC State and would put them in a position where they're walking into every single ACC game feeling very confident in their abilities to win. So that would be absolutely huge for them. And then the quarterback matchup is so much fun. You have a sixth-year guy in Grayson McCall, a very talented player, and then Nico making his only third start ever. So a very talented kid on the other side, but it's going to be so much fun to watch. Two very different styles of quarterbacks, but both incredibly talented. But moving on to the players to watch here, Chris Brazzell is a very talented wide receiver for Tennessee, and I think he's one of those players where Tennessee has so many guys on the outside. They have Squirrel White, they have him, they have Dante Thornton, they have many others. But at the end of the day, I think Chris Brazzell is an impossible cover. I don't think there's a corner in the country that can really guard him for entire 4 quarters. There are people that can do it pretty well. There is no one that can do it outright, and I don't think there's anyone in NC State that can do it all that well, if I'm being totally honest. So I think this is a guy that can kind of open up things. I think you have Squirrel White going downfield, you have Dante Thornton, you have all these other guys. Chris Brazzell might be the most complete of the group, and I think he could be a guy that just puts up crazy numbers this next weekend, or this upcoming weekend. Boo Carter is another guy I want to talk about, playing nickelback for Tennessee after Jordan Thomas went down. And you talk about this NC State passing attack. It's a lot of stuff over the middle of the field, whether it's crossers or it's to the tight end Justin Jolie, who we'll talk about here in a second. You have to be able to cover those guys. You have to be able to tackle strong, and particularly Jordan Waters, who I think is going to be used in this game a ton at the running back position. Making sure you are helpful in the run game is going to be huge for this. So Boo Carter is one of those guys, very young player, very talented, but needs to step up big in this game, that is for sure. Justin Jolie, as we just talked about, incredibly talented. One of those just matchup nightmares for NC State because 6'5", big-time tight end, but also can move like crazy. Is really fast, and one of those players that can totally just take over a game at the tight end position. So you would love to see a little bit more from some of the receivers on NC State than you saw a week ago. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that you can hang your hat on and feel pretty confident in. And then finally, Sean Brown. Sean Brown is taking over for that Peyton Wilson type role where you play linebacker, you play edge rusher, you kind of play around with a number of different things. He needs to be a guy. He needs to be the guy that shows up week in, week out. He needs to be huge in this game and then huge in pretty much every other big game that NC State plays. He is a big-time player, and especially with a young quarterback on the other side, if you can get home a couple of times, then you have him just a little bit rattled early on. How Tennessee can win this game is very simple, if I'm being totally honest. Come out swinging. This is a very potent offense. Throwing down the field is what they do, although the run game obviously predicates all of that. So it's obviously going to be run the ball early on. Definitely make sure you get that going. But at the end of the day, the kid you have under center is so special throwing the ball. It was kind of like what I was talking about in the last game. You want to make sure that this kid does not have training wheels on. You want to make sure that you don't shy away from his abilities because it's a bigger game, because it's so intense, because there's so much riding on this. You don't want to shy away from what Nico can do. Let this kid throw the ball. Let him come out of the gates and be throwing the ball, feel really confident, get into a rhythm, and then it's going to be nearly impossible for NC State to stop him once he's in that rhythm. So this is about, run the ball efficiently, run fast, run multiple, but also get everything going in terms of the pass game. Make sure that you're getting it to all these special wide receivers on the outside and just getting Nico in a groove, because once you do, he's going to be like a boulder rolling downhill. And then be opportunistic on defense. This is not an NC State team that you are going to need to batter and beat to the. You're not going to have to tear them to pieces to beat this team. What you are going to need to do is get a turnover here and there. And they did not play clean football a week ago, put the ball on the ground 3 different times, didn't lose it once, but it was very ugly for a number of different times throughout that game, and they need to be able to possibly get a couple of those. And the other part of this is get home. Make sure that you are getting home in the pass rush and getting after Nico or getting after Grayson McCall, because then you're taking all of the energy out of that NC State offense. So be opportunistic on defense. Don't need to make all of the plays in the world, but at least make enough, especially on that back end, to make sure your team is in a great position going forward. And then James Pierce Jr., just give him a little bit of time. This goes back to that back end that is the biggest suspect part of this team. If you just give James Pierce Jr. and this entire defensive line really a little bit of time to get home, they're going to be able to. There's no two ways about that. So this comes down to them just playing a little bit of sticky coverage early on in that game and letting James Pierce Jr. get into it. He's going up against Anthony Belton for a lot of this game, a very talented, likely a first-round talent at offensive tackle. So it's going to be a really fun matchup. There's no doubt about that. But giving this guy time to work, giving this guy time to get to Grayson McCall is going to give you a ton of sacks in this game. And he's going to be able to be dominant, but he can't do that if the coverage on the back end is not great, or if NC State is getting the ball out quickly, which is actually one of the ways they can win this game. I think one of the big-time things for this game is obviously that pass rush, that defensive line for Tennessee against that offensive line for NC State. But at the end of the day, if you can hold them at bay, for just long enough to make sure that Grayson McCall can do a 3-step drop, get the ball out on a slant or a curl or a screen, and then let Kevin Concepcion and all of these incredible wide receivers go to work on the outside, you're going to have a way better shot. Kevin Concepcion is one of those guys that it doesn't matter who you're playing, it doesn't matter where you're lined up. He is a mismatch. If you get the ball in his hands as quickly as possible, it's going to be hard for Tennessee to stop him. Now, they're going to do a better job than a lot of the other teams in the past have been able to do, but they're not going to be able to do it perfectly. And I think that's going to be the big-time thing is you have so many weapons with Concepcion and Rogers and Jolie. Get the ball out quickly, let this pass rush not get their feet set, and then you might just be running off on offense and putting up quite a few points on this team. Jordan Waters is also a very important player in this game. You look at last week and you see the numbers, 20 carries, 124 yards. It looks really good. He had a 50-yard touchdown at the very end of that game to make it look a lot better than it was. He had 19 carries, 74 yards before that, 3.8 yards per carry. He needs to be better than that in this game. NC State cannot go into this game without a run game and expect to walk out with a win. Now, that's much easier said than done with the Tennessee defensive line on the other side, but Jordan Waters is an outright difference maker. He's a guy that can run through contact. He's a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield and do so many different things, and particularly the NC State offense is run first and then play action. That's what they do. That's the way they're going to go about business. You can't do that if Jordan Waters is taken out of this game. So need to get him the ball early and need to make sure that he at least gets his feet under him a little bit better than it was in week 1. And then you got to rattle Nico early. This is a very young quarterback. I understand what he did last week was absolutely insane, and I'm kind of getting a little taken away with it myself. But at the end of the day, this is still a very young kid, still making his 3rd start in college football and going up against a team that is very smart, very veteran, a good group. Now, the defense leaves a little bit to be desired, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, you can still get at this kid. You can still cause problems for him, and you can still make it so he does not feel comfortable that entire game. So it's really about coming out of the gate, making sure that he knows he is that defense is felt by Nico Iamaleava early on in this game, and then you have a lot of possible mistakes that could come your way. If they don't come your way, then we're having a very interesting conversation about Nico this upcoming Monday about possibly him winning the Heisman. But at the end of the day, a couple of matchups to watch on Saturday. We talked about it, the Tennessee defensive line against the NC State O-line likely will decide this game. I think Tennessee has a really solid, deep defensive line, especially on the interior, but the edge rushers obviously are special with Pierce Jr. and all those guys. But if NC State can hold their own, they don't have to be perfect, because likely they won't be. This is too good of a group to hold them at bay the entire day, but if you can use the short passing game, if you can hold them at bay for just long enough to make sure that this offense keeps moving, you're going to be in good shape. And then you got to open a couple of run gaps, but if you can do what they plan to do in the pass game, then those gaps will open pretty much automatically. And then the NC State wide receivers against the Tennessee DBs is one of the areas of this game that NC State can really take advantage. Their wide receivers are so talented. They're so multiple. They have so many guys out there, and tight ends as well with Justin Jolie. But the Tennessee back end is questionable as of right now. A good group, a very talented group, but still kind of finding their groove. And I think it's one of those things where NC State does not have a lot of advantages in this game. That's just the plain truth. But if you can get those playmakers out on the outside quickly and make sure you can take advantage of the one weakness of this Tennessee defense that you do have, you might just have a shot, and you might just put yourself in a position where you're playing this game deep into the fourth quarter with just a couple of plays that need to be made on either side of the ball. So I think it's about just getting these wide receivers running forward at this Tennessee secondary, because if that happens, they are very hard to stop, especially Kevin Concepcion. And then finally, Nico against this DC is going to be fascinating. Tony Gibson is a very good play caller, someone that maybe doesn't have the personnel that he would love to have, but still has done a number of really good things in the past. And again, a very young quarterback walking into this thing. If you can get after him, if you can confuse him with coverages, if you can do a lot of the things that they very much want to do in this game, you might just get a mistake. Now, we don't really know what Nico is fully yet, so maybe you won't. Maybe he'll just rip you to pieces regardless, but there is a reality where a young player walks into this game with a ton of confidence, and then the defensive coordinator just outdoes him and confuses him and makes it really tough for him to execute. So that would be kind of the only way that North Carolina State could go about this one, is making sure that they get a couple of mistakes from the young kid, but I don't think they're going to get them. I think this one's a blowout. I'll be totally honest. I think Tennessee is rolling off that game, and I understand it was UT Chattanooga. That works against any defense in the country. The balls that he was putting on and the way that he was putting it in those windows, there was no one in the world that could stop what they were doing. It was incredible to watch this team go to work last week. And NC State, while I think they're a very good team, and I don't think this is going to torpedo their season by any means, they have too much to fix from a week ago. To play a team that is so ready to go like Tennessee is, there's too much to overhaul over there at NC State, at least in the short term. I think they will be a contender in the ACC long term, but as of right now, I think Tennessee's just too much for this team. So I do have Nico getting that big-time win, maybe starting a Heisman campaign that we might just talk about a little bit later in the show. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a couple more games. I'll give you predictions for 3 big-time games: South Carolina at Kentucky, we have California heading over to Auburn to play a game, and then Kansas at Illinois is the other one I want to talk to you about. So we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Tennessee heading over to Charlotte to play NC State. I do have Tennessee winning that one pretty comfortably. I think Nico puts on a little bit of a show and definitely starts some very interesting conversations around the country. But let's get into a couple other games. I want to do a little bit of more rapid fire here because these games are a little bit more under the radar, but these are really fun games nonetheless. And we'll start with the South Carolina-Kentucky game because this is a very, very fun one. And I realize I forgot to change the line. I apologize. Kentucky is favored by 10 in this game. A very talented team. One of those games where it's kind of that week 2 game that we've talked about, I feel like a number of times during this week as we started to break down these games, is one team coming off a downright terrible performance in South Carolina, the other coming off a really dominant performance in Kentucky. They got to meet in the middle somehow. I have a feeling that they're going to meet in the middle, and Kentucky is missing a number of players for this game, including their starting running back Chip Trayanum, so maybe this gets a little bit more interesting than we think. But a couple of players that I'm watching, also Kentucky has UGA after this, so maybe a little bit of a look-ahead spot for the Wildcats. But players to watch, I think DeLavon Campbell is a very interesting player for South Carolina. Only had one catch, 6 yards a week ago, but came over from Nevada where he had almost 600 yards last year and is one of those guys that can be a difference maker. They need to find one on the outside because Nick Harbor's not in the rotation much. I don't really know what's going on with them, Marion Brown. So overall, they need someone to show up. And I think DeLavon Campbell is a very talented kid that absolutely could fill that void if they really needed him to. So he's going to be huge on Saturday. If he can make a couple of big-time plays, then maybe South Carolina's pass game can open up some things for their run game that was not where it wanted to be on Saturday either. Dylan Stewart is the other guy I want to talk about. This is a special player. Watching his film from week 1 was just outright ridiculous. He has so many moves on the outside that a freshman should just not have. It's absolutely insane. He had 4 tackles, a sack and a half, 2 forced fumbles in week 1. So he was a big-time reason. He might have been the reason they won that game, frankly. He was an absolute beast and a total game breaker. So him against Marquez Cox on that outside is going to be incredible to watch. But also, you got to worry about Kyle Kennard on the other side, a very talented transfer from Georgia Tech who had 2.5 sacks in week 1. So it's not like Dylan Stewart is alone out there. He definitely has some more people that can rush the passer, and you got to make sure you take care of this kid and then take care of the other guy on the other side as well. And then Marion Brown is a game changer. This kid is one of the fastest players in the country, one of those guys that I don't understand why we don't talk about him more. He is so much fun. He is one of those guys that can take Kentucky to places that they haven't been in quite some time this upcoming year. 4 catches, 28 yards, 2 touchdowns in week 1. He is such a dynamic player and can be used in so many different ways that if you're South Carolina, you can try your best to prepare for him. You're probably not going to be able to get it done. He's so remarkable on the outside that it's one of those things that all you can really do is try to negate him getting the ball as much as you can. And then when he does, just do your best to get him on the ground. And then finally, Alex Afari is a player on that Kentucky defense I really like. He only had 2 tackles in the first week, had 49 in 2023, though. A very talented guy. A guy that, plays that kind of nickelback type position where he can drop down in the box, play that linebacker type role, but he can also play safety and play over top. A very, very versatile player and one of those guys that Lenore Sellers is going to try to run the ball a ton in this game. Alex Afari is going to get a lot of those assignments, so him being able to be a sure tackler in this game could be absolutely huge for Kentucky. Getting into the keys of the game, South Carolina, you got to make sure Sellers gets out of the pocket a couple of times. There's no way they're going to be able to win this game just by doing drop-back passing and expecting Lenore Sellers and these wide receivers to make all of those plays. That's just not a way that they're going to be able to get this one done. So make sure that he can get out of the pocket. Make sure that he can extend plays and use that incredible athletic ability that he does have. On the Kentucky side, keep your quarterback clean. He's still a very young guy, still making his first couple of starts in college football. Make sure that he's playing really just clean and making sure that he is upright because, as we talked about just a second ago, Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard are very, very talented players. Combined for 4 sacks in week 1, and they could do it again this upcoming weekend if Kentucky's not careful. So Vandegrift is an absolute beast. He can throw the ball all over the field, but he can't do it if he's on his back. So make sure that he is upright, make sure that he is kept clean, and then you might just have a shot and just dominating this game, frankly. But for both of them, chunk plays is the way that they're going to be able to win this game. You know, Kentucky loves to push the ball downfield. I think you'll see even more of that as the season goes on. And then South Carolina's run game has a number of people that can break big-time plays. And then in the pass game, if they incorporate some of these other guys, maybe they can get a little bit more there. But I think that a couple of plays could totally change this game, particularly on the South Carolina side. If you can get one or two big-time 40, 50-yard plays, then everything changes in just a second. But overall, I do think Kentucky wins this one. I think South Carolina is a team that is going to bounce back in some different ways this upcoming week, but Kentucky just has too many guys. They have too many guys that are going to play really good football, and I think Brock Vandagriff does just enough in this game to make sure that Kentucky gets the win, and they move on, but maybe it's a little bit closer than some people are expecting as they move into that UGA game. Cal against Auburn is a very interesting game to me. Auburn is favored by 13 points right now, over-under at 53.5, and I think this is one of those games where you look at it and everyone's going to go Auburn. They're the SEC team. They're so strong. They have everything going in their direction from a talent perspective. Cal is a really good team. Cal isn't, this game-breaking team that everyone talks about, but they're one of those teams that any given Saturday can play really good football. Any given Saturday can play with an Auburn or can play with an NC State or a Louisville in that ACC race. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this team. I don't think they're going to be an ACC contender at the end of the year, but I do think they are someone that on any given Saturday could cause problems, and a big reason is because Jaden Ott is on that team. He is going to be the best player on the field on Saturday, and Auburn has a lot of really, really good players. But he does have to be healthy. Got a little bit dinged up in the first game for them. Had 2 touchdowns in that game, so didn't hurt him too much. But at the end of the day, he has to be fully healthy, and if he is, he's one of those guys that can totally take over a game. Go for 200 yards on the ground, 3 scores, and just totally bury Auburn in its tracks. So that's the big time thing that California has their hats to hang on, right? They have the ability to say, we have the best player on the field. As long as he is going and really playing his best football, we have a shot to win this game. And then players to watch, Malcolm Simmons is special. We talk about Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson all the time, those really talented freshman receivers. Malcolm Simmons was the leading receiver for the freshmen a week ago. He was so talented, had 3 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown, did everything that you would want him to do, especially in his first game. So this is a very, very interesting player, and I think when you're worrying about Keandre Lambert-Smith and Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson, this might just be the guy that buries you on Saturday. Jalen McLeod is another guy I absolutely love. I think when you look at Jaden Ott on that other side, you need someone in the interior to stop him. Whether it's a linebacker, a nose tackle, a defensive tackle, someone needs to be in that mix. And Jalen McLeod will absolutely be one of those guys. Had 5 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack in week 1, and he's one of those guys that can just totally tear apart the Cal offense. If they can't run the ball, then it's going to be a long day for Cal. But one way around this really good defensive line is possibly using a quarterback run game in some ways. And I think Chandler Rogers, who was a transfer over from North Texas, might be able to give them that ability. I think this is one of those games where you can't just line them up and expect to beat Auburn. You can't just line them 11 on 11 and say, we're just going to run our game. You got to get a little bit different. You got to get a little bit multiple, and I think having that second quarterback to bring into the fray with Mendoza might just make this a little bit more confusing for Auburn to deal with. And then Teddy Buchanan is another very talented player, a guy that transferred in to Cal and had 9 tackles, half a tackle for loss in week 1. This is one of those guys that Jarquez Hunter is likely going to be the way that Auburn tries to win this game. They passed the ball all over the yard in week 1, and obviously that's a way that they're going to go about business, but Auburn's walking into this game feeling like they can impose their will a little bit. They need a linebacker on that other side that can possibly stop Jarquez Hunter and make this a little bit harder for that Auburn defense, and I frankly think Buchanan might be the only guy that can really do that. Keys to the game, Auburn, get explosive plays. You know who you are. You know what you have on the outside. Pushing the ball downfield is going to be the way you want to go about business. For Cal, keep Auburn off balance. I talked about the quarterback run game. I think that's going to play a part. Use Jaden Ott when you need him. Possibly push the ball downfield if you can at times. just utilize everything in your playbook in this game to make sure that Auburn just is very confused throughout it. And then both of them win the line of scrimmage. Whoever does this is likely going to win this game because both teams, I think, are going to likely try to run the ball as much as they possibly can. Both very, very talented running backs on both sides with Jaden Ott and Jarquez Hunter, so I expect that to be a big-time part of the game, and whoever wins that battle is likely taking home this one, and I think it's going to be Auburn. I think Auburn is really rolling right now. I think they have too many weapons on the outside. I think Cal's offense is one of those that is very much feast or famine. If you stop that run game and they have to pass the ball all over the yard, it's going to be a long day for them. So I'm going to take Auburn to win, go to 2-0, and continue rolling into that SEC schedule. Kansas at Illinois is the last one I wanted to talk about. Kansas is a 5.5-point favorite, 55.5 over-under, and this is a really fun one. Jalen Daniels is obviously the most electric guy on the field, but Luke Altmaier is coming off maybe his best game of his career in Week 1. Played really, really well, had, I believe, as many touchdowns as incompletions, so did exactly what you want him to do. But I think both the back ends for these teams are not necessarily great. I don't necessarily think they're bad. I think Kansas has some really, really good players in Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant on that back end, but I do think Illinois struggles back there. So maybe that's the difference maker here. Maybe Kansas can make some plays on the back end that Illinois can't, or maybe vice versa. Maybe Illinois can make some plays and Kansas back end struggles a little bit in this one. But players to watch in this one, Pat Bryant just has to attack this back end. This is the best wide receiver for Illinois. Had 5 catches, 63 yards, 2 touchdowns in Week 1, and he's going to be the biggest downfield threat. He's going to be the guy that you have to be able to stretch out this defense, because if you can't, and you can't get the run game going, you're in a lot of trouble if you're Illinois. You do not want to trade punches with Jalen Daniels in this offense for Kansas. So making sure that you have a couple of players downfield that can make that big play, and then run the ball. That's the way you're going to want to win this game, but as long as you have a couple of big-time plays downfield, you'll be in really good shape. And then Gabe Jacas is a very talented linebacker for Illinois, had 3 tackles in Week 1, 31 tackles, 4 sacks a year ago, so can do plenty. And I think when you talk about this Kansas team, Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw can cause so many issues in the run game along with Jalen Daniels. You have to make sure you keep them at bay. And that can be edge rushing, that can be linebackers, that can be defensive line. It's usually a mixture of all three, no doubt about it. But I think this could be a guy that really has that big-time effect and maybe takes away that read option where the quarterback pulls the ball and maybe makes this offense just a little bit easier to kind of corral for Illinois. Luke Grimm is an absolute beast at wide receiver for Kansas. He's been there for what feels like about 10 years, but he's got 6 catches, 111 yards, a touchdown in Week 1. He's such a tough cover. Very long, athletic receiver. One of those guys that can make every single play that you want him to make on the football field. And it's likely going to be the transfer from Texas, Terrence Brooks, getting a lot of that assignment. I believe they have faced off before a couple of years ago when they played in Texas against Kansas. But it's going to be really interesting to see this matchup, because if Luke Grimm wins that matchup, then Illinois is in a lot of trouble. I can just put it that way. A very talented player that can totally take over this game. And then Mello Dotson on the other side for Kansas, a very talented cornerback, 5 tackles, a pick 6 a week ago. So this is one of those guys that Illinois wants to play balanced football. There's no two ways about that. They want to make sure that they can run the ball and then possibly get those big plays over top. If Mello Dotson can make that one big play when they try to make that, shot play over the top of the defense, Illinois is going to be in a lot of trouble and going to be in a position where they have essentially nothing going on offense. The run game isn't quite where you want it to be, and then you throw over top and Mello Dotson's just waiting there to pick you off. So it would not be ideal for them, but definitely a player that can change this game in an instant. The keys to the game for Kansas: spread the ball around. This Illinois defense is so talented in the middle of the defense, but the back end is not necessarily all that great. If you can spread the ball to Luke Grimm and all of these talented players, and then maybe get Daniel Highshaw or Devin Neal out on the outside receiving the ball, it's going to be really hard for Illinois to get any beat on what you're doing offensively, and then you're going to score a lot of points. For Illinois, run the ball. Just run the ball the entire day. Caden Fagan is a very talented player, but you have to make sure that he gets the ball as much as you can. Make sure that you dominate the inside and are able to run the ball, slow this game down, keep that offense on the sideline for Kansas, because this would likely be the way that you could attack Kansas. That interior defensive line is not necessarily quite as strong as they would want it to be, so maybe Illinois can just lean on them. And then for both of them, just make that one defensive play. These are two very much offensively inclined teams, and if you can make that one big-time play, if you're Kansas or if you're Illinois, you might just be able to get a win on Saturday. And then I'm going to pick Kansas. I think this is going to be a really fun game. I think it could come down to the wire, maybe a late kick to win this one, but I think it's going to be two very different styles. I think Kansas might just fly down the field. I think Illinois might just methodically plot down the field, but we're going to see some points and we're going to see a very, very fun game, but I do have the Jayhawks taking that one home and continuing on into Big 12 play with a lot of confidence. But a ton of really fun games. In fact, we'll have a couple more for you tomorrow. Just do a quick roundup of all the games that I missed throughout, but it's going to be a lot of fun. This weekend is absolutely crazy. There are a couple of games that it doesn't seem like it's quite as crazy as week one, but there's plenty of games that are going to be so much fun to watch. So cannot wait for that. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the top 10 teams and what do we need to see from them this upcoming week. A couple of them had some very bad performances in week one, and we have to figure out what went wrong and how they can kind of fix it this upcoming week. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just went around to 3 different games that are really, really fun in that kind of afternoon, late evening slate where you have Kentucky, South Carolina, you have Cal, Auburn, you have Kansas, Illinois. Going to be really, really fun games that might be a little bit under the radar, but still are very much worth your time. But let's get into the top 10 teams because there were a couple that did not play good football a week ago. So what do we have to see from them this week? What do we have to see against a lot of inferior opponents for a lot of these top 10 teams? But we got to see something. We got to see a lot of improvement for some of these teams. And we'll go ahead and jump into this. And Georgia, this one is about as clear-cut as it can possibly be. Get a win, stay healthy. That is the only thing that Georgia has to take care of on Saturday because they are by far, or not by far, but they are the number one team in the country and they're playing really incredible football. The one thing I would love to see is Trevor Etienne likely should play. I don't know if a decision has been made one way or the other, but would love to see what this offense looks like with him in it. I would love to see the run game work a little bit differently and maybe you get Nate Frazier a little bit more involved because very good performance from the freshman in week one, but just, show variability, do rotations, make sure everyone's healthy, and then walk out with a win, obviously. But at the end of the day, this is one that you probably don't need to tune into. Georgia's going to take care of business, and as long as there's not that big-time injury or anything bad happen, they're in good shape going into week 3. Ohio State is a kind of interesting one because Western Michigan was a muffed punt away from likely beating Wisconsin a week ago. They are a very good team and one of those teams that I don't think Ohio State's going to struggle with by any means, but could give them a little bit of a scare. But on the Ohio State side, I want to see something different than last week because they did get off to a little bit of a slow start last week, and in a week where you felt like Ohio State was going to be pedal to the metal, trying to prove a point, show that they're going for everything this year, it looked a little monotonous at points. But at the end of the day, if they can come into this game and absolutely dominate, keep everyone healthy, maybe show off that run game with Will Howard just a little bit more, they're going to be in really good shape. This is obviously a game that they should definitely take care of and kind of just move forward from. But at the end of the day, you would love to see just a little bit more efficiency from this offense throughout the game and kind of assert that dominance from start to finish the way that they probably should have done in week 1. This is obviously the big-time one, right? You talk about Texas heading up to Michigan this Saturday. There's a lot of things you got to see. There's no doubt about that. If they're going to want to get a win for Texas, there's a lot of things that they're going to have to do. But the biggest thing for me is Texas last year beating Bama was a huge thing. It was absolutely massive. It showed everyone that they were going to be a contender that year. It showed everyone that they were a playoff caliber team in 2023. I feel like beating Michigan on Saturday would be proving to everyone that they're going to be a playoff caliber team for quite some time to come. Because you look at all the things that changed at Texas this past offseason, and it's not even close to what changed at Michigan. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, they had a lot to replace. They had to replace their top 4 pass catchers. They had to replace probably the 2 best defensive players they had a year ago. A number of things had to change over there at Texas. But if they walk up into Ann Arbor and get a big time win, then it's kind of just proving everything that Sark has been talking about, everything, all the groundwork that has been laid in Austin, it would just kind of be seeing the fruits of that labor, showing that you are a team that can walk into Michigan and get a big-time win, the same way you walked into Alabama and got a big-time win. Show that that was not an aberration, show that that was not an anomaly. That is who you are. You can walk into any building and get a big-time win. So more than anything, we can talk about X's and O's, and we did that in the breakdown, but at the end of the day, it's about Texas showing that they're not going anywhere more than anything else. This is about an attitude thing where you walk in there, you're playing a very physical team in Michigan, but if you can go punch for punch and win that game, everyone's going to be saying Texas isn't just a team right now, they're a team for quite some time to come. Alabama plays USF, and obviously this was the game that gave them a little bit of trouble last year, and maybe it could again, who knows. But at the end of the day, what you need to see from this Alabama team is just look the part. For the first 3 weeks of the season, that's what Alabama needs to do, because you walk into that Georgia game in week 4 with any opening, with any weakness in this team, Kirby Smart's going to exploit it. I can promise you that. He's an absolute dominating force in the coaching world, and I think when you look at the next couple of weeks, USF can cause problems with Byron Brown in that run game. If you can stifle that run game and make it look like your defensive front is going to be a dominating force, then you feel really confident going into that Wisconsin game. And then if you can totally stifle Wisconsin, who looks just clunky on offense right now, then you're going to be going to that UGA game thinking, who says we can't beat them? Who says they're going to walk in and take over the SEC today? So it's a lot of kind of confidence building for Alabama early on, where you have a new coach, you have a lot of new players. It's a lot of just proving that you're still Alabama, and then you go into that big game in week 4, and then you prove you're one of the best teams in the country. Notre Dame plays Northern Illinois, and this is a very interesting game. This is one that I'm going to be watching a little bit closer because Northern Illinois can play ball. Ethan Hampton is a very good player, very comfortable in that offense, and Antario Brown, a very talented guy at running back, someone that frankly could play on a number of Power 4 teams if he wanted to. But we saw Marshall knock off Notre Dame 2 years ago. We've seen Marcus Freeman not necessarily coach his best football in some of these games that should be layups but don't necessarily end up being layups. I tend to believe this one's going to be a layup. I tend to believe they're going to be able to get out there with a win, but it's one of those games that you have a feeling you could be looking up in the third quarter and Northern Illinois is within 7 points for whatever reason. But I do expect Notre Dame to win. Would love to see Chris Mitchell get a little bit more involved in the offense, but overall I think it's the same thing as Georgia. It's about winning that game, getting out of there healthy, and continuing on with your possible college football playoff run. Ole Miss gets another layup in week 2, and a lot of this is going to be about Jackson Dart, because the reality is this is a game you're going to win. You're favored by 41 points in this game. You're going to be able to get this one done against Middle Tennessee, but at the end of the day, this is about showing you're not going to take your foot off the gas pedal. Ole Miss has been one of those teams in the past couple of years that you play incredible football one week, the next week it looked clunky and weird, and it's just kind of out of sync. Show that you're not going to take your foot off the gas pedal. Show you're a team that can put up 70 on every single team that you play, and show that you are a team that is not going to shy away from anything. And then help Jackson Dart's Heisman campaign out just a little bit on Saturday. So it's one of those games, again, win, stay healthy, all of that stuff, but maybe, just maybe, boost Jackson Dart up in the Heisman just a little bit on Saturday. Oregon going to Boise State is a very interesting one because the Oregon O-line needs to be better. That period, end of story. That's the number one thing you need to see from Oregon this weekend, and Boise State's D-line is not necessarily anything to write home about, but if the run game struggles against Boise State this weekend, I think there's a big-time reason to worry about Oregon, because then it goes deeper than just Matthew Bedford being on the field or not. It's definitely bigger than that, and even when you get him back, it'll get better, but maybe not all that better. So it's one of those things that you want to show that you can still impose your will, want to show that you can still run the ball the way that you need to, and the offensive line has to really assert their dominance, and then show you can get explosive. They had very, very few in the game in week 1, and that was a huge reason why it was as close as it was they just could not push the ball downfield. Show that you can do that. Show that that part of the offense did not leave when Bo Nix walked out the door, and then you feel really confident heading into week 3. Penn State playing Bowling Green is one where just keep the good vibes rolling in State College. Don't let this team be one of those teams that plays really good one week and then lets an inferior opponent sneak up on them and makes all the fans worry the next. just play really well. Be explosive, have fun in your offense, let Drew Aller do his thing, and then walk out of there with a win, because they're in a really good spot where they have a bye week after this one. They have Kent State, Illinois, and then UCLA. They need to just play really clean football for the next couple of weeks. They need to make sure that they are walking into that game at USC with a top 15 matchup, undefeated, feeling really confident in that offense and that defense. So this game, as much as any of the next couple, is just about executing. It's just about doing what you did in week one and doing it maybe just a little bit more clean, although it was very, very clean in week one. Missouri at number 9. Buffalo is who they have this upcoming weekend. This is a ramp-up game for Missouri. This is the first game. The first game is all about getting that depth going, getting all the new faces going, and all of that type of stuff. But you have a couple of games coming up that are going to be tough. Boston College is next week, and we saw what they can do against some top 10 teams. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those games where you want to see more from that run game. You want to see Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel get involved, and then you want to just see Missouri. You don't necessarily need to see anything special. You don't need to see them, absolutely beat them by 70 points, but you definitely want to see a dominating performance and then roll into Boston College and possibly take them to the woodshed as well. But we'll talk about that when we get there. And then finally, Michigan. Obviously, this is another big one. We talked about what Texas needs to do. For Michigan, it's a little bit tougher because obviously everyone's kind of approaching this game as if Texas is going to walk in there, totally blow them out, and then just walk out with an easy win. That's likely not going to happen. I can almost promise you that. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is find an identity on offense. It felt like in the first week they were trying to call a game for Alex Orji, but Davis Warren was under center. They need to find a way to kind of meld those two worlds, whether it's getting Alex Orji a little bit more involved in the offense, whether it's letting Davis Warren take all of the snaps. I don't know what that looks like, but make sure that you're walking out of this game knowing exactly how you're going to go about business going forward, because the run game did not get going in week one, and they obviously going to need that going forward. So I think it's one of those games where for Michigan, obviously you want to win. Obviously that's going to be a game where they very much expect to win. There's no doubt about that. When Sharon Moore and those boys walk in on Saturday, they expect to win that game. But if they walk out with a 10 or 3-point loss and they have done a lot better things on offense and are the defense that we know they are, I think they still feel really confident. I think they still walk out of this one feeling like they can possibly make a run of the Big Ten title and possibly get to the playoffs. So for Michigan, obviously, they expect to win. They are going to fight their darndest to win this game, but there are a couple of things that you could see in a loss that would still make you feel very confident in Michigan going forward. And overall, these top 10 teams, a couple of them have their work cut out for them. Oregon and Michigan did not play as clean a football a week ago as they very much wanted to play, and they got some pretty big games this upcoming weekend. So we're going to have to see growth in those specific places. We're going to have to see people kind of start to make those differences, but it's going to be interesting. I feel like some of these top 10 teams, obviously there's not those big marquee games outside of Texas, Michigan in the top 10, but there might just be one that sneaks up on us just a little bit. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my hot takes for this upcoming weekend. I have a couple that I want to get to, and some that are a little bit more outlandish than others, but I got into it and definitely have a couple that I really much like. So I'll break them down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the top 10 teams. What do we need to see from them this upcoming week? For Oregon, it's very, very clear. Get that O-line going, make sure you can get a couple explosive plays in, send a message that you were the team that everyone was talking about going into the year and not a disappointment going into week 3. That is for sure what they want to do. But let's get into my hot takes. I have a couple of hot takes for this upcoming weekend that I think some of them are a little bit outlandish. I think some of them might just be layups to happen if I'm being totally honest. But let's get into this right now. And I think Nico is going to start his Heisman campaign on Saturday. I think he is such a special player. And I think when you get one of these types of games, obviously a lot of people are going to be tuned into Colorado, Nebraska. But there's going to be plenty watching this game. And I think it's one of those spots where you have a big enough game where people are going to be watching. It's a top 25 matchup. You're in a spot where you're going to get a lot of eyes, but this NC State back end is not good. This defense for NC State in general is not very good, and you have a play caller in Josh Heupel that knows how to take advantage of that. And we saw what Josh Heupel can do with Hendon Hooker. A poorly kept secret is Nico is better than Hendon Hooker. He can rip the ball all over the field, has all the confidence in the world, and fits this offense about as well as any other quarterback in the country fits their offense. Just period, end of story. He does everything the exact way that Josh Heupel wants him to do it. So I think he's going to be able to take advantage of that NC State back end. I think he's going to be able to do some really remarkable things this weekend. And then we might just be talking about this kid as possibly winning the Heisman in his very first year starting. So a very talented kid, and I think this weekend might just be kind of a start of a big-time story in college football this upcoming year. Oklahoma, I think, is going to be battling Houston this upcoming weekend, and this one is a little bit crazy, but it's kind of that college football craziness pick. We talked about this throughout the week, but Houston was downright terrible a week ago against UNLV. Oklahoma rolled over Temple. At some point, they're going to find their center. Obviously, Oklahoma is a much better team than Houston is and definitely has much more talent. But at the end of the day, I do think this is a game that they could cause problems. Donovan Smith is one of those guys that kind of an oxymoron type of player where one game it's absolutely terrible, the other game he looks like a first-round prospect. So maybe this is that game. Maybe Oklahoma, although they're favored by 29 points, it did start a little bit higher, so maybe people are buying into what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, I do think this is going to be a relatively close game when we get to the fourth quarter. I tend to believe Oklahoma will likely pull away from there, but as of right now, I think Oklahoma might just have a chance to get a little bit of a scare on Saturday at the very least. Moving forward to Clemson, I think they win this Saturday. I think they beat App State. I'll probably get into a full breakdown of that game tomorrow, but I don't think they fix the offensive issues. I think you have so many questions coming out of this game still around this team that you do not need to have. And right now, they're favored by 16.5 points. It's gone down in the first couple of days of this, so it's one of those games that anytime App State is playing a Power 5 opponent, you do not want to take your eyes off it. I can promise you that. But I think Clemson's one of those teams that it's still going to look clunky. I think they're a very talented team, and I think those freshman wide receivers will come along as really good players in time, but at the end of the day, they're putting a lot on those kids' shoulders, and I don't think they're in a position to really have this explosive offense that they want to have. So I think it's still going to look clunky. I still think Phil Maffa is going to be really the only thing that really works for this team offensively on Saturday, and I think App State is going to walk out with probably a 14, 10, 13, something around that type of loss. But at the end of the day, I think Clemson's going to be walking out thinking, we still don't have an offense. We still don't have what we need on the offensive side of the ball to be able to compete in the ACC, and they could find it, but this weekend is definitely going to be a very interesting one for Clemson in the long run of the ACC race. Byron Brown, I think, is going to give the Tide just a little bit of a scare this weekend. And I know this one sounds a little bit crazy because when you go back to what happened last year, you have to assume that Jalen Milroe, Jahad Campbell, Deontay Lawson, all those players that were on last year's team, especially Jalen Milroe because he didn't get the chance to play in it, want to come back and prove a point. I feel really, really confident, and that's the way that they're looking at this game. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of picking with my heart here. Byron Brown is one of the most talented players in the entire country. He can do stuff on the football field that is mind-boggling, if I'm being totally honest. But I think it's one of those things that Kane Womack loves to come with blitzes. He loves to be very aggressive, and Byron Brown is one of those guys that if you leave him any gap in that blitz, he can step right through it and go for 30 yards. So it's one of those things where you have the ability to possibly make some of those pretty mundane plays if you're USF and still have a big-time success rate against this Alabama defense. And on the other side, you have really good wide receivers, very speedy guys. Sean Atkins is a guy that very confident, very comfortable in this offense. If you maybe Bama rush off or pass rush and all of those different things that can really affect you don't get there quite as quickly, and you can keep them off balance, and then you're going to have to get some pretty spectacular plays from Byron Brown. I can be pretty comfortable saying that, but at the end of the day, I do think he's one of those players that can totally change a game, and even in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, might be able to make a little bit of noise this upcoming weekend and cause Tide fans just a little bit of worry. Absolutely love this kid, and I think that game, although it was a very close one and maybe Alabama's coming in with a little bit more energy this time around, I still think USF has enough players to make this one just a little bit of a scare for the Tide before they likely pull away in the fourth quarter. I want to talk about T-Mac here for a second because this Arizona offense is just absolutely incredible, and I think he might just continue his record-setting pace this upcoming weekend. They have Northern Arizona. It should not be an issue by any means, but T-Mac is the only player that they like on this team apparently at the wide receiver position because he had 304 yards receiving on Saturday. The next leading guy had 29 yards, and it was Quali Conley, a running back. So they don't like any other receivers. Noah Fafita wants to throw the ball in one direction, and that is to T-Mac every single time. So I do think this is going to be one of those games where you're likely going to be able to take advantage of this team every which way from Tuesday. I think McMillan is one of those players that it doesn't matter who's on him. He's going to dominate you, but especially against some Northern Arizona guys, I think it's going to look pretty ugly, and he might just be in store for another 200-yard game this upcoming weekend. I think Texas Tech might just be playing in their second overtime game in 2 weeks. We saw last week what happened against Abilene Christian where, frankly, they escaped with a win. They likely should have lost that game, but a drop touchdown kind of kept them alive. But they have Wazoo this weekend, and it's a good Wazoo team. It's a team that, although a lot of things were changing over there, they kept a lot of really talented players on that team. They have John Metter, who's running that offense, very confident and comfortable. Kyle Williams is a problem on the outside for Washington State, really good player. Josh Kelly actually on Texas Tech right now, playing his old team, a little bit of a revenge game for that guy. But overall, it's a very, very fun game, and it's one of those games that you're looking at and you probably expect Texas Tech to be favored in this one, but they're not. Washington State is favored by 2.5, and I think we're going to see a really fun one. I think it's going to get up and down. I think we're going to see a lot of points. I think this one is going to go to overtime. It's going to be absolutely crazy. I likely will break this one down in a little bit more detail tomorrow, but this is one of those where I don't think Texas Tech can stop anyone. I think they're going to have to score about 50, 40 points a game to be able to even remotely compete in the Big 12. And then Wazoo gave up 30 points to Portland State last week. So I tend to believe this is going to be a little bit of a battle. It's going to be really, really fun to watch this one. And although it's at 10 p.m., I might just be up late watching this one along with that Oregon-Boise State game. Cannot wait for those two matchups. And I think we're going to get another overtime game, and Texas Tech's players are going to be just dog tired at the end of this one. I can promise you that. But the other thing I want to talk about is DJ Lagway. He is officially going to start this Saturday for Florida after Graham Mertz is still in concussion protocol. And frankly, this is a prediction I don't love making because Graham Mertz is hurt, and that's the reason that DJ Lagway is starting. But I don't think he's giving this job back. I think he's playing Samford this weekend, obviously, and that's going to give him a good ramp. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be in a really, really good place this upcoming weekend and be able to really take advantage of a lower-level defense in so many different ways. So I think it's one of those games where Florida looked downright terrible last weekend, and all of the fans saw it. Billy Napier saw it, and Billy Napier knows all the noise that's around him. I think if this kid comes out here and say he throws for 250, 3 touchdowns, and has a rushing touchdown, every single fan in Florida's fan base is going to be yelling to keep that kid in the game. They're going to be yelling to keep that kid as the starting quarterback going forward. And I think when you're Billy Napier, as of right now, I would love to say that Billy Napier can make, really calculated and really, tough decisions as of right this second. You kind of just got to throw stuff at the wall. You kind of just have to make sure that you're exhausting all of the possibilities of what this team can be this upcoming year before you walk off into the sunset. So if that means DJ Lagway starting, so be it. If that means changing play callers, so be it. Whatever it looks like, Billy Napier is now in survival mode. And I think the biggest way to possibly save yourself in some ways is put that kid on the field. Show the fan base that there is a bright future after this year. There is a kid that is going to come back and be really talented. And then maybe you can, assert the idea that if Napier leaves, then Lagway leaves, and you have this weird conversation. So I think right now Billy Napier in Florida are just looking for answers. I think those fans are looking for a reason to be excited. This kid is a reason to be excited. So I expect him to start this weekend, have a really good week, and then be able to keep that job pretty much throughout the entire year, barring any injury, of course. But I do think it's one of those things where Florida's just looking for a spark, and if that kid's the spark, then they're just going to roll with that kid the rest of the way and figure out what happens at the end of the year, obviously. But it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. This week is going to be a little bit off the walls. I have a little sneaking suspicion, and we'll get to that into that a little bit more detail tomorrow. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.